All right, good morning and welcome. My name is Selena Dorme. I am the Manager of Engagement Capacity with the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. I'm also a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver, which is where I'm joining you from today. But I'd also like to recognize the neighboring nations that also share this unceded territory, which is the Musqueam and Squamish too as well. So good morning and thank you so much for joining Webinar Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about salary surveys and salary grids. As you just heard, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel within the next day or so. So if you'd like to go back and review it or share it, you definitely can do that. There are a number of other webinars on a variety of different topics on the FNPSS YouTube channel as well. And we also have a Facebook group too as well, First Nation Administration Mentorship page or something along those lines. There's lots of different titles and acronyms in my job and I get them all mixed up, but there is, and we will put the link in the chat so you can find that stuff afterwards. We have three presenters today, and I'm going to introduce them briefly in the order of which they'll be speaking, but they will introduce themselves a little bit more when it comes time to their presentation. So first up, we will have Teresa Mullen. She's going to be speaking from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and their experience in developing a salary survey and moving into creating a salary grid for their nation. And then we're going to hear from Cathy Murphy from Fort Nelson First Nation too as well again, and she's going to speak to Fort Nelson's experience in developing that. And then we will hear from Wendy Ham from the AFOA BC, so Aboriginal Finance Officers Association of BC, a little bit later to talk about the salary surveys that they have developed and have been doing for a number of years now. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. She's put some good information in the chat. All of our presenters, I think I'll have some slides that they'll also be sharing. There's a link in the chat with those slide decks if you want to follow along that way. Of course, it will be screen shared too as well. They're free for you to download and keep and review or share later afterwards if you'd like to. And she also shared the link to the Facebook group that I was talking about. And that's really just an open space for folks like yourselves working in First Nation administration to pose a question. It doesn't have to be about salary surveys. It could be about anything related to your job. And hopefully there's somebody that can answer your question or has dealt with a similar challenge or has a tool or a resource that is going to be helpful and beneficial to you. So I encourage you to sign up for it. Yes, it's another group. You probably have a million groups on your Facebook page or other social media, but it is a wonderful resource filled with folks that work in a similar environment like you and a great place to bounce ideas off of each other. So I encourage you to check that out. And as always, just encourage you to check out the First Nations Public Service Secretariat website. In addition to these Webinar Wednesdays, there's a variety of training that we offer and other mentorship opportunities that we offer too as well. So I won't spend too much time talking about FNPSS, but please feel free to reach out to us if you, after you check out our website and you want more information, myself or anybody else on the team. We have a general info account, info@fnps.ca if you want more information about us, because there's a lot more that we do than just this webinar. So I'm going to stop yakking and yapping and get on with it. So I'm going to hand it over to Teresa Mullen to get us started. Thanks. Over to you, Teresa. Or would you like the slide to be pulled up right now, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, that's okay. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here today. As Selena said, my name is Teresa Mullen. I am the HR manager at Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and I did lead the compensation review project back in 2020. It started. So on the agenda, next slide, please. So on the agenda today, I'm just going to be going through the whole process that I supported in. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background information about TW Nation and why we decided to do a compensation review. I'm going to let you know a little bit about the consultants that we hired to support with the project, which is Western Compensation and Benefits Consultants. I'm going to go into some compensation governance best practices. And then I'm going to talk about the position information questionnaire, the targeted comparison organizations that we chose, the positions that we chose to benchmark, our pay policy position, some salary ranges and implementation, and then conclude it up Next slide, please. So a little bit about TW Nation, some background information. So TW Nation hadn't previously conducted a survey compensation paid to comparable organization positions by appropriate comparison organizations. The employee turnover had been extremely high at that point in time. So in the previous 12 months I think we started it in about February 2020. In the previous 12 months, there have been about a 25% plus, resulting in abnormally high recruitment costs, a lack of continuity in staff knowledge, as well as increased orientation costs. So TWN's existing compensation levels presented a huge recruitment challenge. We were losing a lot of employees as well because comparable organizations were paying a little bit more. We had a lot of negative feedback from existing employees regarding the competitiveness of salaries, as well as there was a lot of complaining about employee deductions for benefits. So at that point in time, TWN had a 50-50 copay plan, and it was quite expensive. And so therefore in 2020, we decided to conduct a market survey of total compensation. Next slide, please. So we decided to go with Western Compensation and Benefits Consultants. A little bit about them. WCVC is a Canadian firm owned by its senior professionals. For 40 years, they have assisted Canadian and international organizations. Their services include all aspects of compensation, benefits, performance management, and related human resource areas. They have professional staff, meaning that all of their staff have degrees and professional designations in compensation, employee benefits, human resources, accounting, actuarial science, which are your retirement programs, finance and management consulting. Their clients include the private sector, public sector, not-for-profit sector, Indigenous organizations, and when asked, they would be expert witnesses. Next slide, please. So a little bit about compensation governance best practices. So WCVC would collect and evaluate total compensation because types and value of compensation components provided varies from organization to organization. This just means that total compensation, they would look at total compensation versus salary alone. So when looking at total compensation, it includes your benefits, your paid time off, bonuses if organizations provide bonuses, retirement, etc. They didn't want to just deal with position titles. It just creates a better match. Ensure complete and up-to-date position information is used for the survey matching. They select appropriate targeted comparison organizations to compare to, and then develop a rationale and definable pay policy position. So the first major step is the position information questionnaire. So we had to distribute a PIQ to all staff to fill out. It also helped update individual job descriptions in the organization. So the PIQs are used to describe specific tasks that you perform daily in your role, and you had to be really specific and really think about the things that you do day to day to include into it, because again, it is helping build your job description. The PIQ assesses the content of the position as it currently exists. So we didn't want people to discuss what they had done in the past or possibly what they may require in the future, because you want it to be specific to what you're doing right now. The PIQ includes things like key responsibilities and the percentage of time it takes to complete each task, any internal or external contacts that you're communicating within and outside of the organization, any supervisory responsibilities if you supervise, advisory responsibilities, which is your technical or specialized advice, guidance, instruction to individuals you don't supervise, any reporting relationships, and lastly, your education and experience required to do the job. So the information is used specifically to match other positions in other organizations opposed to using the title. It gives a much clearer picture to the consultant and helps them when trying to figure out exactly what the individual does in that specific job. Next slide. So the next step in the process, once the PIQs were completed, the CAO and I met with the consultant to discuss what organizations were comparable to TW Nation. We needed to figure out what businesses were similar to TWNs with similar positions. We did this based on their annual revenues, the size of the organization, and we also took into consideration the geographic location. We ended up choosing 7 different First Nations entities and 5 municipal entities to participate in the market survey. Next slide, please. So when creating a targeted market survey, you wanted, oh, sorry, I accidentally shared. So when creating a targeted market survey, we wanted to ensure that only about 25 to 30 positions were chosen. Anything more than that, it would be hard to have other participation from organizations, because the market surveys that are quite extensive to fill out. So once we chose, I think we ended up choosing about 29 positions in total to benchmark. And when choosing the positions to benchmark, we made sure that First Nation specific jobs were represented in the targeted market survey, and that the positions spanned across all departments. So for example, any accounting or HR positions are very generic positions that exist in a lot of organizations. They can get comparison information from their database, which holds an extensive amount of data, whereas for First Nation specific positions, it's a lot more difficult to find this information. So the proposed positions, of course, were sent to us to include in the survey to First Nations organizations and municipalities. We reviewed the positions, we picked our 29 positions, and then the next step was the consultants design the compensation questionnaire, utilizing the position content from the TW Nation's completed PIQs. So that's where the PIQs are really important. So the questionnaire included all components of compensation, such as salary, short, long-term incentives, perquisites, paid time off, which is your holidays, vacation, any other paid time off, group benefits, and retirement savings benefits. So the next step in the process was picking a pay policy position. So once we figured out what comparable organizations were, along with the positions to compare and include in the survey, we decided on P50. So we wanted to be competitive in the market, but we couldn't afford to be a pay leader. One aspect of the review was how to determine and put additional weight on all of our cultural positions, which of course are really important to TW Nation. So the pay policy position we decided to put on our cultural positions was P75, and then we used P50 for the rest of the positions. So the cultural positions are, of course, our most hard to fill roles, and we wanted to ensure that we retain staff in these unique roles. TW Nation also decided to include into the compensation valuation 100% employer paid benefits, which of course would help in retaining our staff, onboarding new staff, and make our current staff quite happy. So I just put a little bit of an explanation of statistical terms in here. So P25 is the 25th percentile, which represents the number where 25% of the people are paid below this point and 75% are paid above. P50 is the 50th percentile, or the median, which represents the number where 50% of the people are paid below and of course 50 above. And then the 75th represents the number where 75% are paid below and 25% are paid above. So the last step in the process are salary ranges and implementation. So WCVC took all of the information from the comparable organizations and TWN, valued the total comp, extracted the compensation database information, conducted an analysis, and developed salary ranges. So TW Nation, of course, we had to take all of that information, and based on our own knowledge of some positions, which they didn't have a lot of data for, we made any necessary adjustments to finalize the new salary ranges. And then we were also provided with some TWN salary guidelines, which helped us when onboarding new employees. It kind of gives us a bit of a guideline on where to slot new employees based on all of those factors previously, such as experience, education, etc. And then the next step was implementation. So we had WCVC present all of their findings to Chief and Council. for approval. And once it was approved, we developed our new salary ranges with new range minimums and maximums. And then of course we had our payroll team implement all of this and put it into our HRIS. And then the next step was, of course, HR met with all of the directors and ensured that all of the employees sat within the new salary ranges. So in conclusion, we started the process in about February of 2020. As we all know, unfortunately, COVID hit in March 2020. So the PIQs took about 4 months for all employees to complete. The normal length of time for a project like this would be anywhere between 3 to 6 months, depending on how quickly people are returning stuff. The PIQs took until I think the end of July to come in. And then by the time we were able to choose our comparable organizations and positions to benchmark, the market survey was created and distributed to all the participating organizations. That went out in about October of 2020. So of course that went out over Christmas and stuff. So that did take about 3.5 months to come back to us or the consultants, with a lot of nudging from the consultants. There were 12 participating organizations, so it was a lot to compile. But once they got it back, I think they got it back in about February of 2021, and they had the report back to TW Nation by March 2021. So once we reviewed and made any necessary adjustments, we made the presentation to Chief and Council, and we had a finalized salary range by July 2021. And thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We have four questions in the chat. Nope, and then 5. So we'll try to answer those as quickly as possible. And then if we have some time, then we'll take some live questions. So Mo asks, PIQs are great for more stable established roles, but for more senior roles, there are a lot of tasks which are not established. How do you address this, or how did you address this?
Sorry, I'm just going to read it. I think, well, so this is what took a really long time, because we really did ask them to think about all tasks. And of course, there's always that last other duties as required, but we really tried to have any work that they did, we included into the PIQ. And so that was another reason why it took 4 months, because there was a lot of sending back and forth. And I did really ensure that the directors and even the CAO were including as many tasks as possible. And then of course they're comparing to other organizations as well. So it ended up all being reflected into the salary ranges.
Thanks. The next question is from Christine regarding the PIQs. Are they reviewed and approved before the next step?
Absolutely. So all the PIQs were filled out by the employees. They were sent into HR. I would review them and then let them know whether or not they needed to add more detail, which most of them did. And then, of course, if I needed any extra support from the consultant, I would reach out to the consultant as well. And they had to all be approved by their current manager before being sent back in, before us sending them into the consultant.
Great. Does the salary survey include Chief and Council salaries?
So at TW Nation, no, we don't have our Chief and Council aren't on our payroll. They are paid via honoraria.
Great, thank you. Why did you choose this method rather than job evaluation and classification of jobs?
So good question, because eventually we will end up having to do job evaluation method. We had both presented to us, and at the time we had an HR team of 2. And job evaluation is a very long, extensive, lengthy, and task to take on. And so at the time, because TW Nation had never done a market survey before and had done job evaluation, we decided to do the market survey, because job evaluation just, unfortunately wasn't compared to market, and we weren't comparable.
Great, thank you. Did you have to develop new or update existing compensation policy as well? And how often do you plan to review your salary grid?
So best practice is we're reviewing our salary grid every single year annually. So we, like, for example, this year we reached out to the consultants and they let us know what the average was that organizations were giving for increases in salary and their recommendation on how we should move our salary grids, our minimums and maximums. So we do that yearly, and they do their background work and let us know what we should do with that. And then, of course, we are going to be doing this probably once every 3 years.
Great. How do you slot in new jobs? Is there a committee, or is this done by the HR or a manager?
Again, that's what the consultants are there for. So they have an extensive database and lots of information in regards to our comparable organizations, et cetera. So any new positions that come to us, we send to the consultants. If they're more First Nation specific, then we have our own review process that HR takes care of.
Great. A lot of great questions here. Were there any legal issues that came up in changing employees into the new pay grade?
No, because it was all increased.
we
would never decrease.
Okay. What is the cost for the contractor to conduct salary assessment process? How are the employees who are currently above salary range addressed?
So there, of course, if there were any employees above salary ranges, then of course they would be red circled, but we didn't have that issue. And sorry, what was the first question?
The cost for the contractor to conduct the salary, like during your whole process and working with those consultants.
I would say it ranged anywhere from 45 to 60,000 altogether.
All right. Another question. Did they use incentives to get the comparable organizations to complete the market survey? What was the response rate from other organizations?
So the incentive for other organizations to participate was they would get a high level report to show how they compared in general to the market. So they would get a report at the end that would let them know what other nations are paying their employees for those specific positions that they participated in.
Mm-hmm. Colette asks if the Tsleil-Waututh Nation is in the treaty process, or I guess completed treaty, or has negotiated a treaty.
I can't answer that question. Sorry, I'm not sure.
Okay. Salaries reach cap limit even with rising cost of living. I guess, did you incorporate that COLA, the cost of living, which is COLA? Did the salaries reach the cap with that, and or without that? I guess, did you consider that in the whole process?
So TW Nation has actually done a cost of living increase for the past couple of years, as long as I've worked there, but best practice is not to take into consideration the COLA. This year, of course, cost of living prices have increased drastically, but normally it's not this high ever. So we didn't take that into consideration. We wanted to see exactly how the market was moving so that we could be competitive with the comparable organizations, as opposed to looking at the cost of living. So that wasn't taken into consideration. We were more comparing to what other organizations are going to be doing and how much they're increasing, so that we can increase the same, so that we can still remain competitive.
Great. And last question before we move on to Cathy. Do you use the PIQ when a new job is created, or do you write the job description based on the comparable jobs in bank of jobs that consultants have? Does this mean that you are dependent on the consultants in your continued growth?
So eventually we don't want to be dependent on the consultants because it was a market survey, yes, but eventually we will move to job evaluation, where HR can take on all of that, the compensation role. In regards to any new job descriptions being created, we give them the choice of using a PIQ, but for the most part, we just create the job description.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa. And so many wonderful questions. Keep them coming. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
And she did leave her contact information on the last slide. So if you want to reach out to any of the speakers, their emails are on their final slides of the deck. So please feel free to reach out to any one of them. All right, next up is Cathy Murphy, and she's going to be speaking to Fort Nelson First Nations experience developing their salary grid.
Thank you so much. So first, I just want to thank the FNPSS for asking me to present today on behalf of Fort Nelson First Nation. And I would like to provide a land acknowledgement and just let you know that I am coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Fort Nelson First Nation people, and a lineage acknowledgement, and to just acknowledge that I'm very grateful to the people of Fort Nelson First Nation for taking care of these lands since time immemorial. And a little bit about me, I am the Human Resources Advisor for Fort Nelson First Nation, and I've been working for Fort Nelson First Nation since 2012, and I've been working in HR for Fort Nelson First Nation since 2013. And so I've been working with them continuously since that time. So just to go into a little bit about the salary survey. And so my presentation today is more conversational and more sort of what I did in the process. And so our salary survey was to create a salary grade structure, and our work environment is a non-union work environment. And I'll get you to go to the next slide, please. So some background information so we've had a salary scale. There's been one in place since I've been in the organization in 2012. And in 2018, our organization conducted an in-house salary survey. And what I mean by that is we used our internal HR resources and staff to support the salary survey efforts. So our salary survey process commenced in January 2018, and the total of all of the work that was completed during the entire survey and review period for benchmarking jobs and wage rates was completed by February of 2019. Next slide. So some consideration. So in 2018, we commenced work on the following, and I'll actually add one more component to this. So salary surveying started, which was comprehensive research and surveying and gathering and compiling internal and external information. So going out into the marketplace and finding out what other comparable employers were paying, so on and so forth. And I'll get into that a little bit more. We also were working, so all of these things were being worked on in tandem, because as you're compiling information, there's one piece of information that stands out, in the salary survey. And then there's another piece that starts to work into the development of the salary grade structure, and then doing the job evaluation analysis with the employees. And then I would say that these three things in tandem fit into sort of either refining, defining, or redefining your compensation strategy. So with the salary grade structure, we were determining pay ranges that can be used throughout the organization. So we were determining the minimums, mediums, and maximums. And so because we were doing job evaluation analysis, we were benchmarking the jobs internally of the organization. We were comparing internal jobs for job family classification, and we were also comparing our internal jobs with the jobs in the marketplace as well. Next slide. So the salary survey, what sort of information was I collecting? So I was doing both formal and informal interviewing and surveying of employees. So asking employees about compensation, including their salary and benefits, just encouraging them to be very open and honest about what they wanted, what their expectations were, what would benefit them, making notes about those sorts of things, just keeping comprehensive notes when doing the informal surveys. And then SurveyMonkey, so sending out a survey to the staff through SurveyMonkey. So also looking at comparable employers, and again, it's just researching the marketplace. So looking at municipalities, looking at other First Nations organizations, and again, looking at similar size and number of staff. And if the information was available, did they have similar operating budgets? So not using a consultant and using internal resources only, it can be a little bit difficult to gather some of this information. This is where it's very helpful if you have a network that you can work with, where you share as appropriate some information to support one another. So relevant information about comparable employers, so looking both locally, regionally, provincially, and nationally to determine comparable pay levels for specific job classifications. So this included reviewing employers in other regions with similar labor market characteristics and similar cost of living. So for example, Fort Nelson, northeastern corner of the province, we have limited healthcare here. So to get a CT scan, for instance, it's going to mean that an individual is driving 3 hours, depending on how quickly people drive, 3.5 hours to Fort St. John to get that CT scan, which may only be 5 minutes, right? But that would be the closest place to get that done. So we're looking at remoteness, of location as well, and what's available in terms of amenities. So reviewing employers in other sectors as well with similar or same occupations. So looking at the healthcare sector for positions such as home care aides, personal care aides, LPNs, RNs, that sort of thing. And then job classifications across employers and sectors as well. There's actually quite a bit of information out there. If you're researching, you'll see that some provinces have their job classifications, job evaluation analysis systems online. And so there is a lot that you can compare to. So other sources of information. So the AFOA does a salary review. And so that'll be talked about a little later when Wendy comes on. There's the CSSEA, which is really great for looking at benchmark positions for the parasocial workers. So your outreach workers, such as child and youth support workers. Robert Half does a salary review. The company that Teresa worked with also does a salary survey. And so a little tip is if you participate in these surveys, you do gain the results about current and relevant information. You can also find information, of course, regarding BC wage and salary information online. And then I was also looking at the CPI, right? And so then benchmarking, when you're benchmarking, you want to benchmark apples to apples, and that's where the job evaluation analysis comes in. And so we really involved the employees in that process. We provided them with the job evaluation analysis tool. We even had them grade, because we used a point band system. So we even had them grade their jobs, in terms of how many points they thought it was worth when considering all of the factors that were being graded. Surprisingly, a lot of employees undervalued their jobs, and that was corrected when I, in consultation with the supervisors, reviewed those jobs, and we made sure that they were set in the right pay bands. And so, of course, you're benchmarking to low, median, and high salaries. And I'll get the next slide, please. So evaluating information. So you want to ensure that the surveying is conducted in an objective, valid, and reliable manner. So keeping notes, keeping research files, preparing briefing notes for those who need to know the information and outcomes, acknowledging the sample size. So just putting all of this information into your final presentation, whether that be briefing notes or slideshow presentations. So acknowledging the sample size, the time frame that the information was collected in, and the errors. And so sometimes when we're looking at research, some of the research is dated. So conducting a survey in 2018 meant that there was some information that I was looking at that was from 2016, so it was dated. So we had to put corrections in place. And that's where the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is really helpful. It helps you with establishing what those corrections should be. So the sample size needs to be considerable when you're looking at wages and whatnot in the marketplace. And so 3 samples may give you a low and a medium and a high rate, but the sample size is too small to provide any valid information that's useful regarding percentiles. And so you want to be able to establish, the positioning percentile of where your jobs in the organization are being ranked and paid. So survey results need qualitative information that helps you to understand the why, the how, or the what of the survey, and then the quantitative information tells us how many, how much, and includes the calculations. So report the survey results in a comprehensive manner. So using plain language, defining terms and explaining the process and giving examples, because there does have to be buy-in, right? And so you want to have as comprehensive a report as possible, but also easy to understand. So consider the total compensation package. So this is the piece that's really done in tandem, like when you're doing the salary surveying, establishing the grade structure, doing the job evaluation analysis, you're also reviewing your current comp package. So your total compensation, you're comparing it along the way to what other employers are offering in comparison to what you yourself are offering. So like, for instance, I'll just give an example. So we may pay $20 for job A and someone in the marketplace is paying $23. But then if we, take a look at our total compensation package and what we know about their total compensation package, that $20 job may actually be worth $30 when we consider, health benefits, pension benefits, paid time off. So all of the benefits and perks. So you really want to consider, your group benefits, your pension benefits. Are you contributing to RRSPs or pension or both? What sort of bonuses, if any, are being offered? Is there a learning and development allowance? Does your organization pay for professional association dues, conference fees? So the learning and development component would also be like continuing professional development. What do your paid leave days look like? Flexible work schedules. So these next two are becoming very hot topics in the marketplace. And so flexible work schedules and remote work options. And if you're offering remote work options, is it at the request of the employer? Are they responsible for cell phone and internet? Or is this something that the employer provides a reimbursement for, either part or full? Does your organization offer compressed work weeks? Is there a parental or maternity top up? So there's lots of things to consider with respect to compensation, and those all need to be figured into, the final value of the rate for that job. Next slide. So defining, refining, or redefining your compensation strategy. So resulting from the salary survey, consideration should be given to your organization's current compensation strategy by studying internal factors such as statements about compensation and benefits. So what statements have you made to your employees about compensation and benefits? And typically you'll find those in your policies. And how does your organization go about implementing pay and increases? And so for us, we use a performance-based system whereby employees engage in a performance planning session annually that's tied in with our overall strategic goals and initiatives for the organization. So it's a comprehensive process of planning and reviewing and setting out the work plans and the goals, and then reviewing that through check-ins throughout the year. And then the final review, and upon a points system, achieving a certain set of points may mean either an increase, it may mean an increase plus eligibility for training, it may mean an increase in training incentives, and perhaps even preparing that employee for succession planning. So then considering benefits and rewards offered to employees and to classifications of employees. So considering, are we offering all employees the same things, or are we offering them rewards based upon classifications? So meaning, would we offer an entry-level employee the same rewards as a manager? So just thinking about those things in terms of motivating, and reviewing budgets. So taking a look at, what the organization will bear is something that we looked at, like looking at our base wage rates, our mandatory employer-related costs, plus our benefits and rewards, and then what sort of perks. So after surveying the marketplace, did our compensation strategy require changes? And I would say that over time, since 2018, we have looked at our compensation policies and we have actually revised some of them. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of a salary grade structure. And for us, we do work with a point band system, and so you can see the point band grade there in the first one. So grade 1, level 1 support workers. So support workers could be the first 5 grades of our salary scale, you know, having a step 1 to a step 5, 1 being of course the lowest wage rate paid, and 11 being what we call the traditional wage rate. And so when an employee reaches the traditional wage rate, they've topped out. And so the only adjustments then that they would receive would be if, you know, if we were looking at reviewing the scale and increasing percentage-wise to each step. And then also, and I won't get too much into salary grade and structure, but another component is sort of, you know, how to set out that salary grade structure. And for us, it was starting with the top role in the organization. So the executive director, and determining the executive director's pay band, and then what was the percentage difference between an executive director's starting rate and the director's rate, and then using that same strategy for determining the difference between what a manager is paid at a starting rate and a director. And so you end up with these percentage differences between the starting rate for your executive, director, manager, supervisors, foremen, professionals, and then so on and so forth until you've worked out grade 1 and what you'll be offering at grade 1. Sorry, can we just go back to that other slide? I'm very chit-chatty and I want to just tackle one other component. So you'll see here job families and classifications. So in grade 1, you'll see worker 1, clerk 1, utility 1, laborer 1. Like, what is that, right? Those are just classifications. They're not the actual names of the jobs, but what happens is, as a result of doing the job evaluation analysis system and then benchmarking those jobs and then setting them in line with the NOC codes, so the National Occupation Codes, then we determine, like, you know, is this a worker 1, you know, or is this a worker 2? So in the end, with the job evaluation system, we end up with a lot of master job profiles, and we use those then for setting our new jobs in the organization and where they'll fit on the salary scale. Next slide, please. So implementing a salary survey provides opportunities too. It's a lot of work, but I like to look at it as opportunities. So it provides opportunities to learn about total compensation that employees are seeking. You know, like, are we doing good here, or do we need room for improvement? Learn about other comparable employers and what they're providing, learn what's happening in the marketplace, review, refine organizational compensation strategy, benchmark jobs, foster internal pay equity, and improve your organization's your gross organizational happiness. So that is the end of my presentation, and I will welcome questions.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Mo asks, what guests think about the best approach to addressing high inflation? So I guess we can start with you, Cathy, and then once we hear from Wendy, we could go back to allow some of the other facilitators, speakers to address some of the questions that were general, but go ahead and answer that one.
Sorry, can I get you to restate that question?
What do you think about the best approach to addressing high inflation?
Consultation. I think the best approach is to survey employees and get some feedback from employees, sort of do an employee pulse survey and take that information and just also take a look at, you know, current events and what's happening in the marketplace, and then also consult with chief and council and, well, with the executive team as well, because it's their budgets, and consultation with chief and council. So I think a lot of consultation with all parties to determine, you know, how you can move forward with addressing inflation in the organization.
Great, thank you so much. And I just want to jump to Tanya Thomas, who is with Williams Lake First Nation, jumped in with how they address inflation. So she said, of course, it's a tricky subject for her organization. We took the approach of the managers having to complete a pay increase from where they can recommend pay starting from 3, 5, 7, or 10%, and they have to justify their recommendations. So all increases were based on the employees completing their goals and overall performance, even though inflation is at an all-time high right now. We went with the unionized groups that were offering, which was anywhere from 2 to 3% as a minimum. It's tough when we're trying to rebuild our structure and having to rely on various funding streams for certain positions instead of own source revenue. So thank you, Tanya, for throwing in Williams Lake First Nations approach to inflation. Much appreciated. Additional question for Cathy. Is the work to review salaries funded by any particular or a combination of programs, or is it primarily funded by a First Nations own source revenue?
To review, yeah, so it was an in-house undertaking. We didn't receive any external funding to do it back in 2018. I don't know if there would be something like that available today or not, but it was all in-house, so own source revenue.
Great. Thanks so much. Another question, do you have a policy created for acting allowances and or standby pay?
We do have an acting pay policy, and I have a draft standby pay policy, but we don't have it implemented at this point in time.
Question is from Christine, is part of consideration of your employees prioritized as important to them? Comp versus higher benefits or flexible / remote work?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, I think that the individual is asking what employees value more. Is that correct?
Yes, compensation versus higher benefits or flexible / remote work time.
Yeah, I think that what I see an increasing trend for is more time off. It's everything, right? There has to be balance. And so there has to be a balance of, pay equity, fair wages, benefits, but increasingly I'm seeing more time off, flexible schedules, and remote work allowances. Those are, I would say, the top three.
Great, thank you. Do you incorporate funding that may be offered by provincial or federal governments regarding top-ups for PSWs, for example?
Can you define, I don't know that it's important to define PSW, but I'm just at the moment, I can't think of what that term means. But in terms of wage top-ups, they're different. So there's wage enhancement programs that are being offered provincially. And some of those wage top-ups have to go directly to the employees. So the employer doesn't get to use those to offset the wages. So they cannot go back into the employer's coffers. There are sometimes programs where the employer can utilize those funds for assisting with wages, but I haven't seen any of those in a while, to be quite honest.
Thank you. Another question, is it appropriate to incorporate exit strategies on initial hiring of staff, or is that a standard HR protocol? It would be great to hear about staff or executive reviews.
So exit strategy, I'm not certain if that question means exit strategy in terms of termination clauses in contracts, or if that means exit interviews once someone has resigned.
I'm not too sure either, but if you'd like Trent to clarify a little bit more on your question, that would be great. We can go to the next question to Carl. In your HR process, do you incorporate succession planning?
That's a great question. So succession planning is something that we're working on, and it's definitely been something that we've been talking about and focusing on for the past year. And I would say that in an informal manner, there is succession planning in the organization, but have we yet crafted a document for succession planning? No, we have not. But we do find ways to implement succession planning. So for instance, if you have a management role and you know that you need to plan for succession for that management role, there may be supervisors or coordinators in the department that you can consider, or you may need to hire an assistant manager. succession planning is a little bit complex, and there are a few ways to go about it. So I don't want to get too into that. I don't know if that was helpful. I hope it was.
Sorry. No, yes, it was. Thank you. And sorry, my phone started going off. My apologies. Trent adds on to his question, any strategy information is good, but adding clauses into original contract is more of what he was asking. So like the idea of a standard interview process.
Oh, okay. Was this for executive or for any position?
He said staff and or executive.
Yeah, okay. So our process is quite formal. So from the job description to the posting, to the recruitment process, to screening, to interviewing, to scoring the interview, to making the offer. And, an executive that we hired one time, and this is many years ago, I remember like going through the negotiation of a contract because it was a position that was off scale at that time. And I remember it got to be like quite tedious, the back and forth. And something that he had said to me, because he was quite high level in his designations and certifications, he said, everyone likes to think of entering an organization as the marriage and it's in the honeymoon phase and everything is like bliss and wonderful. He said, I like to think of the contract as, what's the divorce going to look like? And so I think it's very important to have a good termination clause, and maybe you even add, clauses on severance. So like if you can build severance into a part of the contract. So like, for instance, each year is worth X dollars of severance, provided that the individual stays for, X number of years. It can be framed out differently. If it's like a term position, as long as the person stays for 3 years, when they leave, they get this amount of money, but then the termination clause can be set out quite differently in terms of, with or without cause. It's a little bit complex. So I don't know that I have enough time to really delve into that in this session.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. Another question came in. I'm currently transitioning from a wage structure to a salary structure, and I do not want to lose my benefits. What would be the easiest way to figure out the difference to keep the same take-home pay with inclusion of the deductions and time off, including sick pay, statutory holidays? Yep. Yes. And this is from Muriel.
Okay, that's a super big question. And I would love to actually have that question emailed to me, and I could provide, some feedback on that. The first thing that comes to mind is, even with our salaries, we have a base hourly rate. And so everything is based on an hourly rate, even the salaries. So, an employee is either hourly or salary, but the salary is set out using a base hourly rate and a set number of hours per weeks per year, so on and so forth.
Great, thank you. And we can circle back to Muriel, or as I mentioned, Cathy's email is on the last slide of her presentation too as well. So you're free to email her after that. Oh, and thank you for putting it in there, Michelle. All right, we're going to move on right along. We're doing really good on time. We're going to ask Miss Wendy Ham to go ahead with her presentation. Thank you so much, Cathy. If they're all going to stick around until the end, there still will be more time for questions after Wendy, so don't worry. Over to you, Wendy.
Good morning, everybody. I am so happy to see some familiar names and faces today. My name, if you don't know me, is Wendy Ham, and I am the Executive Director of AFOA BC. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I am coming to you on the unceded territory of the Coquitlam people, and I am happy to live and work here. So today I am going to talk a little bit, if you're not familiar with the AFOA BC salary survey that is done we have been doing this for a long time, since 2001, but I'm going to try and get through this rather quickly because both the previous speakers did talk about a lot of things that I have in mind. So I'll try not to take up too much time because I think that there is a lot of questions that people have with regards to salary surveys and such. But I'm just going to start by just giving you a brief overview of us. AFOA BC was founded. We stand for Aboriginal Financial Officers Association of BC. We are a chapter in the larger organization. There is a national organization, AFOA Canada, but actually, AFOABC was where AFOA was founded in 1996 as a nonprofit organization it started to assist finance managers in professional development and networking. And now, you know, it's grown, it's morphed. We have certifications in public administration and human resources management. And we also do work with economic development corporations, elected officials, administrators, managers, and community members. So we have over 300 members here in BC alone. We provide conferences and workshops and educational and just general capacity building efforts here in BC. So next slide. So we do an annual, biannual, once every 2 years, we do a salary survey. So I'm just going to get into a little bit about how the data is gathered and to give you just a general overview. Next slide. So we've been publishing this since 2001, as I said. We did it annually for the first few years, but as you can imagine, as both their previous speakers have mentioned, it's a big process to gather all this data together and put it into something that is really helpful for individuals. But so now we do it once every 2 years, and we're about to embark on that again for the 2022 because the last one we have out is 2020. So next slide, please. So how do we do it? Well, we do it using an online survey tool, SurveyMonkey we use, and we hire Jouta Performance Group has been the group that has been doing this for the past number of years. They're getting really good at it because they have done it since I think 2015, if not 2012. I'm not quite sure which one was, but they've been doing it for a long time. And so they're getting pretty good at organizing the data and such, but we do it through SurveyMonkey. We send out the information to all of our members, actually all First Nations, not just our members, but all First Nations in BC. And they're asked to submit actual pay data. So for all of their positions within their organization. So then we kind of give general job titles, but we ask them to also comment on the closeness or the quality because we give a brief job description in our survey and so they can see whether that is relatively close or not close to what that benchmark is. Next one. So we also ask them, because we think this is very important in collecting the data, is the size of their organization. We used to determine the size of the organization based on revenue prior to 2020, but we've changed that based on the size of their membership. So we have small, medium, and large organizations or First Nations, so we organized our data based on the size of the organization. We thought that was a little bit better way to earmark those salaries. And the survey, we do ask that the survey combine both compensation and benefits. It's the total compensation package. Next. So we actually ended up, I think, with about 55 positions in our salary surveys, but the job categories were defined as the following: management and administration, finance and accounting, human resources, social development, health, education, on and on. And we did, in this past 2021, we did gather information about chief and council remuneration. And that is also, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but we did try to gather some information or some data on chief and council remuneration as well. So next. So then we also, of course, as Cathy talked about, where positions in Indigenous organizations are common in the general labor market, we provided benchmark data from the Economic Research Institute, an ERI. So there's an ERI number, and we're able to link that to the position. So that gives a much broader market-based understanding of salary rates in the market. ERI is renowned in North America for providing robust salary information for, oh, I see a typo, of course, I was trying to do this quickly, but 6,000 positions, not 600, 6,000 positions that can be presented by industry, geographic area, and such. And then we also, much as Cathy did, we also included benchmark information from the Community Social Services Employers Association BC, CSSEA, which also their collective agreement, which does give a lot of information around social services and health. So, one of the things that I think it's important, you know, when you're doing a salary and you're putting it out to the population, it's important that there are limitations, right? And so I'm just going to note some of the limitations that we do talk about in our salary surveys, but they're based on survey responses and are only as accurate as the data that we get back. So we rely on all of you First Nations to be able to participate in this, and the more data we get, the better the information is, right? So we would urge that if you do see one of these come up, please feel free to fill it out and be included in the results, because I think it's really helpful for many organizations who don't have the time nor the money to be able to do large internal work. So we don't really take into the regional differences in salaries. They're not taking it, you know, into account, only because it's very difficult to do that, you know, urban versus rural, remote locations and such. We do take an aggregate of the number of participants we get. So, and some positions have small sample sizes because there are unique positions within First Nations. Sometimes there's not a lot of First Nations that may have that position. So we maybe not get as much or as robust data as we would have hoped. Yeah, and so the differences that you would see from maybe 2018 to 2020 could be the difference of the number of participants or what that job position might have. So just some ideas of when you're looking at this. It's not perfect, but it certainly gives a really good understanding of where positions lay in other First Nations in BC. Next slide. So what did we find out? Well, we looked at, so when we're doing this, and I think it goes to talk about that one question about wage to salary, and there's a lot of things to be able that you must take into consideration when you're dealing with a something like this, right? And so we asked general questions. We asked general, you know, like hours of work. So 66% of respondents said that they have a 7-hour work day or a 35-hour work week, and 25% have a 7.5-hour break. 65% of the respondents, or 65% of the First Nations, say that they provide the 60-minute lunch hour and 25 a 30-minute, and 21% say they pay for their lunch breaks, and 79% provide unpaid lunch breaks. And I think this is important, especially when you're trying to calculate going from a wage to a salary. You have to take all of these things into consideration when you're looking at converting. Also, we look at vacation days, right? Most employers start full-time employees at 10 days of vacation, though a third of them started at 3 weeks vacation. So that was an interesting piece of information. And 96% of organizations provided a group benefit plan and a retirement plan for their employees. So that is, most of them anyways. So here's an example we used of the salary scale as it shows up for in our salary survey. So we have the position of receptionist. This is a description. Please note that when you do provide this information, no First Nation is called out. Like there's no, it's just aggregate information. So it's not personal information. It's just, it's put together as an aggregate. So what we do is we talk about how many quotes or how many positions we collected, the average salary in 2015, the average salary in 2020. Actually, I think that should be 2018, not 2015, but anyways, and it gives a median salary, the 25th percentile, which Teresa talked about, the 25th percentile versus the 75th percentile. So we calculate both of that and the average hourly rate. And at the bottom, you can see an ERI benchmark, which is, again, the benchmark receptionist rate given to us by ERI. So we have, like I said, there's about 55 positions. It gives a little description, so you can try and fit your positions if they don't fit in exactly, and be able to get some salary information out of it. So next slide. And as I said, we did do a chief and council compensation. We tried to get as much as we could on chief and council. It's very difficult. Because of the difference in way chief and councils are paid across the province. Some organizations pay an honoraria per meeting or activity, while others do pay a salary, and others pay a combination of both. So we looked at all of that. We tried to standardize it, and we did come up with some information on that, so that it gives you at least some idea of where they sit around the province. Anyways, excuse me. So in summary, I just wanted to say, while many organizations want to proceed with increases in line with their compensation philosophies and plans, it comes down to their financial ability to do so, given the current climate and future uncertainties. Right now, we know that, inflation is high. I think, compensation policies need to be in place that kind of talk about how compensation will be, and COLA is determined and such, and that gives the more information you give to your employees, the better off you are. So, but compensation, as we talked about briefly, Cathy did, is that it's kind of a good time to look at your total compensation package and consider how else you can support your employees where your budgets allow without it actually going to a dollar increase. Next slide. So some alternatives to salary increases could be remote work flexibility and varying hours, right? Financial support for home office spaces and internet cell phone allowances, increased access to EAPs and other forms of emotional and mental health support, allowance for web-based fitness, meditation, other well-being resources, professional development, such as in-house mentoring programs, or allowing time for employees to engage in lower cost online training, additional paid time off, which I think is something that somebody had mentioned before, financial education and resources, and implementing or increasing retirement and savings plans. These are all things that you can consider as alternatives because they do all have a, financial component to it for the employer that is a benefit to the employee. So in that's really all I wanted. I didn't want to take up too much time, but you can actually, if you hit the slide one more time, it will come up with, there we go. You can reach out to me or you can just go to our website and you can find where you can order a salary survey. If you're a member of AFOA BC, you are eligible to get the salary survey at no charge. We do charge our non-members for it, and we will be we'll be looking to do another one. It's extremely popular. We get a lot of interest in our salary surveys, and we feel that it does bring a lot of value to many First Nations who are just struggling with just understanding or knowing what other First Nations are doing. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and to our other two speakers too as well. There is a question about whether or not this is being recorded and available later. So Muriel, yes, to answer your question, we have been recording it and it is going to be available on the First Nations Public Service Secretariat YouTube channel within the next day or so. Question for Wendy, how much does the survey cost for non-members?
The survey currently costs $400 for non-members, and it contains actually information on over 55 positions and chief and council.
Thanks so much. So we have about 15 more minutes open to questions to any one of our other speakers, or as well as Wendy too as well. So just if you want to put them in the chat, we can take some live questions too as well. If you want to just raise your hand and ask your question there. Sherry asks, have any organizations been able to secure funds to complete this work? And it's similar to a question that was asked about whether or not funding to do the work is available through programs or if it was own source revenue, but open to hearing from Teresa and Cathy on how you managed to do that. Teresa?
Unfortunately, no, there was no funding available for it. So it was all own source revenue for TWN.
Yeah, same here.
Great. What is the strategy that everyone takes once the employee reaches the maximum pay on the grid? Like, what is the next step? Do you offer lump sum bonus, or what is the approach here?
So in our organization, it only gets adjusted if the organization adjusts the entire salary structure. So for instance, if there was an increase due to cost of living or rate of inflation, that sort of thing. Otherwise, they top out at the traditional, the last step.
Great, thank you. Sherry says, thank you. There are no other, does ISC provide funding for chief and council honorarium, or is that own source revenue? I'm not sure who can answer that question.
Well, I mean, I know from my experience that no, they don't provide. Yeah, I don't think chief and council is certainly not under band support funding. That's for sure. So I think it's generally out of own source revenue.
Thanks. Clara would like to ask a question live. So Clara, if you could go ahead and unmute and turn your camera on.
Hi. Chief and council get their remuneration. Oh, sorry. They also get their remuneration through the Indian government support money. They can, our chief and council have set up a budget from our own source revenue, because they sit at a lot of other tables other affiliations, so they kind of supplement their annual income through other honorariums, treaty organizations and things like that. But we have a minimum about $1,000 a month for our chief and council through the Indian government support money.
Thank you, Clara. Mo asks how best to deal with non-performing employees if all other options have already been exhausted, including write-ups.
Okay, it's a good question. So if your organization has a policy on performance management or performance management system in place, you know, I would say that the best approach is, of course, always having the one-to-one conversations with the individual, being very clear and transparent about what the expectations are, and also being very clear and transparent about you know, what the outcomes will be if the individual doesn't improve in performance. So if write-ups have been done and there's still an option to work with the individual, I would say setting out in writing either a letter of expectations or a performance improvement plan. So very clear expectations on that. Sorry, I recognize that that's not like a salary survey question, but that would be some input I would give on that.
Thanks, Cathy. Any other questions from the group? Either if you'd like to raise your hand or put your question in the group chat. Right. Then I think we can wrap up a little bit early, unless another one comes in as I'm providing some closing comments. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Much appreciated. Thank you to all of our speakers, Teresa, Cathy, and Wendy, for joining us and providing different perspectives from how communities are addressing it. And thank you, Wendy, for providing information on the salary surveys that have been done. A lot of great information and data collected over time. So thanks for doing that work. As I mentioned before, please check out our website. FNPSS provides a variety of other webinars, but also training too as well. So I'm not going to take a deep dive into what we offer. I'm just going to direct you to fnps.ca. Of course, you can reach out to us at info@fnps.ca for more information about what we do. This is considered called a Webinar Wednesdays, what we offer through our mentorship network, but there are also other mentorship opportunities. And like I said, the YouTube channel has a lot of different webinars and a variety of different topics. So I encourage you to check that out. Lots of thank yous in the chat. So thank you all too as well for your time. And the slide decks have been shared. There's a Hightail link where you can, again, access the contact information for all of our speakers and reach out to them individually if you want to ask them one-on-one questions about their approach to the salary survey or salary grids. And I think that's it. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.